Hi there. This is part of my ongoing coverage of the big Hollywood Reporter cover story last week on House of the Dragon, the first big Game of Thrones spin-off series. Well, prequel set 200 years before. But that wasn't all it talked about. The entire first half of this, it was a two-part cover story, the entire first half was on the road to getting the first prequel, the road to picking and greenlighting the first project among several candidates. So not even covering the rise of House of the Dragon, just all these other things they were considering, some of which got cancelled, some of which are still in contention, recycled under new writers. This is the interview we've been waiting for, officially. Ever since they first announced, we are considering prequel spin-off shows in May 2017, but they wouldn't tell us what they were, and we were speculating. All of the answers finally came out in this. This is the thing we were waiting for. It is the culmination of a 5-year investigation by different fan channels of what are they doing. And it's really the cap to a 6-year-long story because, of course, they were brainstorming ideas for about a year before they publicly told us about it. So this started summer 2016. This is one of those videos that I hope gets 1 million views, or at least that all of the other major A Song of Ice and Fire Game of Thrones YouTube channel creators watch. If they haven't seen this already, that this is one of those big info dumps that we will be referring back to for years. It covers the entire gap between the ending of Game of Thrones and the rise of the next shows, and the direction of this as an overall franchise. Starting with when they decided to start wrapping up Game of Thrones in summer 2016. I've seen 1 or 2 other channels talking about this interview, but it came out the week of San Diego Comic-Con. There was the first full trailer to break down. There was the panel itself. There were other cast interviews. So when they're talking about, oh, these are other projects we considered, I've only really seen Red Team Review and Preston Jacobs and a little of Roarist, like 2 or 3 other people talking about this, but not a lot. Which is unfortunate because it really summarizes the entire direction of not just House of the Dragon, but the wider world of Westeros cinematic universe that they're trying to set up. Touching on the decline of the old HBO, which couldn't adapt to the streaming wars, and they got bought out by AT&T and made HBO Max, and now HBO Max wants a cinematic universe for it. As a book fan, I'm like, hooray, we get more content to talk about. It touches all of these issues. That if you're going to go over, okay, this is the state of the Star Wars franchise, you can't just go, I hated that project, but okay, these were specific discussions they had with directors, these were projects they considered but canceled, or they made that one movie because they thought they could get a TV spin-off about such and such. Going over the behind-the-scenes of the franchise, this gave us all the info we wanted up till now. I'm not going to leave you in suspense. The top 4 big new pieces of information we got, I'm going to go over this, are first, the 5th pitch out of the 5 original ones they had that we could never figure out what it was actually Nymeria and the 10,000 Ships of the Rhoynar. Point 2, related to that, is it wasn't chronologically the 5th pitch. It was actually pretty early. Chronologically, the last pitch made, as well as the first one to be cancelled, was Targaryen Conquest, because it turns out the specific take on it that the writer gave was simply very bad. You know, it wasn't the Targaryen Conquest you or I would make. It was some bizarre revisionist thing. It deserved to be cancelled. But that was actually the 5th one, and I'll talk about the fall of Targaryen Conquest. 3rd point out of 4 is that it turns out Dance of the Dragons went through 3 different showrunners, start to finish. It got rebooted twice. We thought it had been rebooted once. It actually went through 3 different showrunners, and this informs a bit of House of the Dragon, actually, of the reasons they kept rebooting it, the problems they had with it, and what ultimately, I think, worked out in the final version. 4th point I'm going to do last, because it's a lot more speculative. They briefly cover that early on, in the year before they publicly told us, these are the 5 finalists. Well, okay, there's 5 finalists. How many originals were there? Between summer 2016 and July 2017 or so, They had, quote, about 15 ideas, about 15 prequel ideas that they came up with in brainstorming sessions. Though explicitly, they said, this is no ideas too weird, think of anything, and we'll see what happens with it. And some of these were never formal pitches. They don't list them all off in this. But it's a lot more speculative. They do mention one or two of what HBO admits are these were terrible ideas we passed on immediately in the brainstorming session. I'll cover that last because it's the most speculative. But there is a question of, well, what would they make in the future? Maybe these were on that list, but I'll do that last because it's a lot less solid there. But now I want to go over chronologically what was really happening behind the scenes from July 2016 to when they greenlit House of the Dragon, end of October 2019. All the behind-the-scenes stuff that we didn't know about, or we knew bits and pieces of it, but which now makes sense in full context because we only had half of the puzzle pieces. So I'm going to start at the beginning here. July 2016 is when HBO first started investigating what spin-offs they were going to make after the main Game of Thrones series ended. Because that's when Benioff and Weiss sprung it on them that, oh no, we're not staying for a full 10 seasons. We want to truncate the season order to run off to launch our movie careers. And all this came out in that book, Tinderbox. This isn't me saying this, Tinderbox, the insider history of HBO. All the news channels went over this when it came out a couple of months ago, that it describes this meeting where at the height of their fame and popularity, in the aftermath of Season 6, because with all the empty hype of the Battle of the Bastards, and empty spectacle, and blowing up the Great Sept, they thought, we are rock stars, we are megastars, we don't need HBO. We can leverage them into, yeah, we actually want big-budget finale movies. The original plan was that when they kept going, oh, we always felt it was 13 more episodes. No, they said since Season 3, we've been secretly planning to strong-arm HBO as soon as we got popular enough as megastar showrunners. We wanted to have 6 episodes for Season 7 and a pair of finale movies. One for White Walkers, one for Daenerys. You can tell Season 8 is structured like that. And it was really used the spectacle to hide that the writing is very thin, because they want it out. You know, like when George R. R. Martin would say you need at least 10 seasons to tell this story, some people would scoff at that. HBO itself thought that. Their CEO, Richard Plepler, all the insider executives, they really thought this would run 10 seasons. And on top of that, they thought that they would keep having a working relationship with Benioff on other unrelated projects. Like how the guys that made The Sopranos and The Wire kept staying there, that they had a string of flops with other things. Benioff was really their only big success story of the late 2000s, and this was him turning on them, that he cared only about himself and his own movie career, and I'm going to do Star Wars. And I have no sympathy for that, because Plepler is the guy who, at the height of all the controversy of going off book after Season 5, we have interviews, public ones, of him saying, Benioff and Weiss are making a hit show and winning Emmys. They can do whatever they want. And it doesn't matter, who they do it to. And it's amazing that he thought Benioff wouldn't turn on him. That you let him think he can do things with no consequence, that he can go against the author who made the books he's adapting, but he'll never turn on me. That's the way Plepler thought. So the one nice moment in all of this is, even as, the book fandom was feeling really bad after Season 6, that people only care about the hype. They don't even care that they're ruining everything. It's just empty celebrity hype. Behind the scenes, HBO is in chaos. And it was Plepler just soured that I propped up Benioff like this, and he betrayed me. But the practical point of all this is HBO truly did not think there would be less than 10 seasons, and they were in no way prepared to start looking for prequels. They had about 2 years to start looking, and they scrambled. But this was not something that had occurred to them. They didn't think they'd need to. And of course, this is the old HBO under the Plepler regime before AT&T bought them out. First thing they did was they asked George R. R. Martin himself to come from Santa Fe to their offices in Los Angeles and present, what do you think the best prequel ideas are? And he told them his top 2 ideas were Dance of the Dragons and Dunk and Egg. The THR article talks about this a lot more, but it lays it out very clearly. But this is something we learned in dribs and drabs over the years, that Martin said, well, first I suggested 2 ideas, that eventually we found out one of those 2 is the Dance of the Dragons, and just last year we found out the other one was in fact Dunk and Egg, which is really surprising because he said he didn't want to adapt it until the stories were finished. But this means as early as 2016, he was like, yeah, you can adapt at least like the first ones or something. HBO was hesitant to do either one, but I can see their reasoning, that this is not a criticism. If reasonable people can defer, they made some valid points. Well, you can see why Martin thought these were the top picks, that Dunk and Egg is the only prequel that's narrativized from, the narration of Dunk's POV. The whole series isn't finished, but the first 3 are. There's time skips in it, and the scale is very different. It's a focused, boots-on-the-ground story of just these 2 wandering, the Hedge Knight and his squire, as they get into adventures as they walk the earth through Westeros. And that's one of the selling points, that it'd be cheaper to make because it's a smaller scale story. HBO said, well, it would be really weird to follow up on the apocalyptic ice zombies versus dragons thing of the main show with this. It's a little too different in its scale and tone. And I can see a reasonable person saying that. It's really better to pair Dunk and Egg with something else, because the scale is radically different. Dance of the Dragons was the other top pick because of all of the other historical novellas written as in-universe history books. It's the one that has the most source material, 80,000 words. And just you read about, it's this continent-wide civil war, both sides have dragons. It's the War of the 5 Kings with dragons. That's good. It's better than, like Targaryen Conquest. It's multi-sided. It's like, the Targaryens versus 7 independent kingdoms. It'll be harder to cover like that, and it's not as much in print as Dance of the Dragons. They said, well, this is a little too similar to Game of Thrones. And that's a thing. You can be accused of it's redundant. Even recently, George R. R. Martin has said not every prequel should be someone fighting over inheritance to the Iron Throne. Some of these are on other continents or other stories. You can only go to the well so many times. In this case, I think you can, because it's different enough. It's the Targaryens at their height, it's dragons, similar enough but with differences, and we kind of want something like the original show done by different people, doing it better, I guess. But it's a little too similar, could be an argument for, we'll do Targaryen Conquest, because it's not a civil war, it's the establishment of the Iron Throne, but I don't know. So they didn't reject these, but they passed on them and said, let's throw them on the maybe pile. Because ultimately Dance of the Dragons was one of the top 5 picks at the end of the first round of all of this. Point is, July 2016, they ask Martin, he gives 2 ideas, they're hesitant on it, and by May of 2017 is when they announced to us these are the 5 finalists. Well, there are 5 finalists, they didn't tell us the 5th at the time. So in that roughly 10-month period, they described this briefly, that there was a brainstorming session where they said, I'm mildly annoyed by this, but it turned out okay, that they said, we're going to look at all of Martin's works and on our own as HBO executives decide what could be a spin-off. And it's like, he just told you it could be a spin-off. His top 2 picks, he's the living author, the American Tolkien. And you said we're going to come up with our own list, though it was actually a decent list, so I don't want to dwell on that too much. That the network researched Martin's collective works and compiled about 15 possible prequel concepts, is what they said. And I don't blame them for this. They admit in this, some of these were weird ideas that we rejected out of hand. It was a brainstorming session. It was, we'll put it on the list only to reject it. They only gave one example that we hadn't heard of before, which was, and they cite this as one of the weird ones. They had this idea to do that the 7 gods of Westeros were inspired by 7 real-life people who were like a traveling mercenary group or something. And that as their legend grew and became myth, they inspired the legends of the 7 gods. There'd be like this, like a Dungeons and Dragons troupe of one's a smith, one's a warrior. But then how would you do the stranger or the crone? even HBO mocks this as a really stupid idea of, this is the true story of the real ancient heroes who inspired the seven gods of Westeros, that in the books they're actual god. It's not a person inspired it. Martin wouldn't do that. So he doesn't. Martin is a lapsed Catholic, and he's kind of an atheist, he said, but at the same time he doesn't mock religion. That he says, well, there's people who believe in religion in this world, and it's not my place to. I will never definitively disprove that the gods exist, nor will I ever literally have the father and the mother and the seven appear in the thing, because that would be dishonest to that people believe in this as a religion, which by definition can't be confirmed. But HBO itself said that was one of the stupid brainstorming ideas, which we immediately threw out as soon as it was suggested. I'm not criticizing this, that the ultimate list of 5 ideas they came down to by May 2017 were pretty decent. Which brings us to the next big section, which is the bulk of this video. The War of the Five Pitches. That the Hollywood Reporter article by James Hibberd actually uses that subheader, the War of the Five Pitches, though he then explains within the article that he did not come up with that idea, it was a fan name. Well, I'm the one who came up with that name. That, like 2 years ago, I was writing up the Game of Thrones wiki main hub page on all prequel projects. I made a subheader called The War of the Five Pitches, and everyone thought it was funny, so it stayed, and no one removed it. And I guess Hibberd must have read what I wrote, and I'm really thankful to Mr. Hibberd for spreading this name I came up with. You know, it's an obvious name. It's not like some stroke of genius. It's just, oh yeah, I'm the one who came up with that. That he says, quote, that the fact that they didn't pick one but had, like, the 5 finalists were going to compete with each other, quote, this unprecedented bake-off approach would become known cheekily online as the War of the Five Pitches. Well, it's an obvious name, so I want more people to call it that, because it's cool. So, point is, May 2017, they only announced 4 writers, but at the time they said a 5th one is on the way, the ink is drying, or we're trying to finalize it. That is crucial, because we misunderstood exactly what was happening. But let me quickly run through what we understood at the time. That they announced 4 writers, but not what they were doing. Jane Goldman, Max Borenstein, Brian Helgeland, and Carly Ray. And they said a 5th one is coming. About 4 months later, Brian Cogman was announced as another writer. So, okay, we got 5 people now. And then that next year, June of 2018, they said, we've greenlit the Long Night prequel to film a pilot, which they then cast and filmed and got rejected because it was really bad. But by the end of summer 2019, when they were wrapping up the Long Night pilot, late August 2019, Martin, in his blog post, he keeps saying, this isn't the only prequel, there are still 2 others in contention. Of the 5, 1 went to pilot, 2 got rejected as pitches, but 2 of them were trying to make them with story bibles and stuff. One of which became House of the Dragon, which is based on the Dance of the Dragons, the Targaryen Civil War. That it was so annoying that the old HBO, this is the old HBO, they're not even in power anymore, they kept acting like Long Night was the only prequel. That, no, this was the best idea because it's the one we made. Compare that to the AT&T era HBO, which is openly saying we want to have more than 1 prequel running concurrently as a cinematic universe. Because Long Night was actually a terrible idea, and it was them defending that they put all their eggs in one basket on what was at best a controversial choice, because it was a terrible idea. There was no source material, but I'll get into that. I'm going to split off a separate thing about what we learned about the Long Night pilot in this. So Martin said that as late as August 2019, there were still 3 ideas. Long Night, as we later found out, Ryan Condal doing Dance of the Dragons. And right after Long Night was canceled at the end of October 2019, linguist David Peterson, he confirmed that the 3rd idea was Valyria. That he said the 3 ideas were Long Night, Dance of the Dragons, and Valyria that have survived up to this point. And he said there were 2 earlier ones that were only pitches and got rejected so early I don't even know what they were about. Well, Hollywood Reporter article has now finally revealed what the other 2 were. As I said at the beginning of the video, they were Targaryen Conquest, which we guessed because Martin said 2 of the ideas are from Fire and Blood, and Fire and Blood is basically 2 halves, Targaryen Conquest and the Dance. What was the 5th idea? And it turns out it was Nymeria and the 10,000 Ships of the Rhoynar. And the potential showrunner attached to it was Brian Helgeland. And he's a major Hollywood writer. I mean, he did LA Confidential. He got for Oscar stuff on that. So they were taking Nymeria and the 10,000 Ships of the Rhoynar seriously enough with that. I don't know why they passed on it, possibly because they just thought we were only going to do one show outside of Westeros, and the Valyria is the better one. I'd like them both. Valyria is this large, sweeping story, but Nymeria is more focused. That's a linear narrative, so it's actually in some ways easier to do for television. So there's arguments both ways, and both of those prequels are still in limbo, maybe to come back another day. Even Nymeria has been suggested again. I'll get to that. So, yeah, since the beginning, Nymeria was always a top pick. I mean, it got rejected early on, but of the short list of 5 ideas, it was on there. Also, the Hollywood Reporter article here confirms, point blank, Max Borenstein's prequel was Doom of Valyria. Doesn't confirm all the other leak stuff that came out about it, that it's called Empire of Ash, that the factions in it are the Sphinxes, the Young Dragons, the Freeholders. It was a detailed leak, but yes, Borenstein's one was Valyria, and it's one of the final 3 that they were considering. And it's in limbo state now. They never formally canceled it, but they put it on hold. He's doing that LA Lakers show now, Winning Time, with HBO, which is good. It's building up his credentials at HBO and his standing. He recently signed a 5-year contract with them that 3 years from now, we might start hearing about the pitch phase for a Valyria show again. I'm not trying to say it's coming soon. Like, think on the scale of 3 to 5 years, that in terms of Marvel phases, this is the phase after the next phase. Maybe we'll do Valyria eventually, but that's out there. And it's so weird because I kept guessing all these other things instead of Nymeria. I thought maybe the 5th idea is Young Tywin or the Blackfire Rebellion. It was Nymeria. And here's another mistake I made, that it wasn't really the 5th pitch. It was the 5th one we figured out, but it wasn't the last one they added as an afterthought. In that sense, the 5th pitch, which was an afterthought, was Targaryen Conquest, strange as it sounds. Chronologically, going through the records here, the Targaryen Conquest pitch was the last one finalized and the first cancelled, simply because it was a really bad pitch, that it wasn't very good. And what they surprisingly revealed in this Hollywood Reporter article is that the showrunners on it was actually a pair, Rand Ravish and Far Chariot. If you don't remember those names, I do. I don't know if you've been with my channel long enough, but screenshots here. I did a report 2 full years ago in July 2020 on the copyright registrations for Game of Thrones prequel pitches that fans noticed they have to copyright these things. And they give them code names. They didn't reveal what they were. They just said prequel number 1, spin-off number 2. But we figured out who was making them based on their production company names. For example, Ryan Condal, who came later, his production company's name is Bastard Sword. So you can tell, oh, this is a Ryan Condal project if Bastard Sword is making it, though he was a later phase of this. So let me go back to the chart there. This is what we knew publicly was happening. The copyright filings were Game of Thrones spin-off number 1 by Borenstein, which we now know is Valyria, March 23rd, 2017. This is leading up to the May announcement. Spin-off number 2, its name is spin-off number 2, was Brian Helgeland, which we now know as Nymeria, April 17th. There is no spin-off number 3 in the copyright database. That was very weird, and I remarked on it at the time. Game of Thrones spin-off number 4 was Jane Goldman's Long Night, April 25th. By the way, just because it's number 4, we can't, objectively know, was this the first one suggested? All we know is it was the first one, the order they were finalized in. I think Valyria came earlier. You can't really say it was the first one. But it was the first one they okayed and copyrighted, so I don't know. But Long Night was registered 4th when it was finalized. Then we had a record of months later, after the May announcement, August 17th, 2017, Untitled Brian Cogman spinoff. Then, way later, February 2nd of 2018, like the full year later, Game of Thrones spin-off number 6, By Far Chariot. So I remember that name. We had noticed that from the copyright registration. And at the time we went, what, there are 7 pitches? And who is Far Chariot? Far Chariot recently worked on the HBO show The Astronaut's Wife. It's a different writer. So we were asking, why didn't they announce that Far Chariot was working on this? We only found the name out from a copyright database. And notice what name isn't in here. Carly Rae. So you thought, well, maybe Carly Rae did number 3, but they passed on it, so they didn't register. What's going on here? What happened was the copyright filings and the numbering of those copyrights was all messed up because HBO dragged their feet on Chariot's Targaryen Conquest show, that they were really hesitant to accept the pitch, did it months after the rest, and then rejected it really early. And as a result, because it was really bad, and as a result, they never even publicly announced that Chariot was involved. And it was awful from all accounts. The reveal in the Hollywood Reporter thing here, they said it was like this revisionist history thing that would have, quote, portrayed the William the Conqueror-inspired figure Aegon I as a drunken lout. What, to subvert expectations or something? So, keep in mind, yes, Targaryen Conquest is a good idea for a show in principle, but the Targaryen Conquest pitch that Chariot wrote isn't the one that exists in your head. It's not the one you would make, it's the one he made. Similarly, Long Night, so many people had blind faith in that, and I kept telling them, judge what they actually put out, because for all we know, they're doing something really crazy, because Martin didn't even write a novella about this. For that matter, people had blind faith going into Game of Thrones later seasons and stuff, and the version of the A Song of Ice and Fire adaptation they made was very different from the actual book story. Maybe they'll do something different. So, Targaryen Conquest is still a good idea, it's just sometimes you get someone with weird ideas. That's why they dragged their feet on it for so long, and Chariot wasn't announced with the other 4, May 2017, and I think it must have been rejected later that year, and they just filed the copyright for, payment purposes, that, yeah, you made me make a pitch, you ordered it, by that February. So that's what displaced all the numbers here. In turn, it's these two things overlapping, the Targaryen Conquest one by Chariot that we never knew about. Martin said that there were 5 pitches in May 2017, and 1 is on the way. He was referring to Chariot's one, not to Brian Cogman. When they announced Brian Cogman 4 months later, not knowing about Chariot being involved, everyone assumed, oh, Brian Cogman was the 5th pitch, and they were just waiting to sort out his contract because he's busy making Season 8. That is not what happened. He was never the 5th pitch. That Cogman was not actually one of the top 5 first choices to be a showrunner on a successor show. He wasn't handpicked for that. He was a second stringer brought in as a replacement for Carly Rae. Because the Hollywood Reporter article here reveals that Carly Rae, of the original 5 pitches, was the first person doing Dance of the Dragons. And she got into, they say it as disagreements with George R.R. Martin about how to structure it and where to start. And you have to read through the double talk here, and I can't really, but what they generally reveal, it's hard to read into this, what they admit is that they got into a disagreement over Ray wanted to start with the actual war breaking out. Right as soon as Viserys I dies, jump in and try to explain who everyone is. It would have been like the Princess and the Queen novella, the first novella that came out, which starts as soon as Viserys dies. Keep in mind, this is 2016 and Fire and Blood wasn't out yet. Martin said, well, no, it needs to start by covering the Rogue Prince stuff, Rhaenyra's father's 30-year reign, and inherently it would need time skips to do that. Now, I don't know, from the way they said this, if this was purely Carly Ray pushing this, or if HBO was pushing it and Ray was willing to go along with them, or if HBO was just willing to back Carly. So how much of this was Carly, how much of this was HBO is unclear. But at the very least, Carly was helping to push it if HBO was pushing it. That Martin kept going, no, you need to have the time skips. The time skips were the point of contention. Not because they thought it would be confusing. That they made that very clear, and I actually kind of sympathize with the rationale that went into this, even though I disagree with it. They say pretty clearly in the article, we were freaking out that casting the leads twice is incredibly difficult. It was specifically due to casting concerns of, it is a giant task to hunt, the hunt for Arya and Sansa and Jon Snow and Daenerys and all that. That took months when they did it the first time. It is difficult to do this worldwide search for the perfect 2 or 3 lead actors. And you want us to do that twice, that we have to cast Rhaenyra and Alicent, which is a task unto itself, and then cast them again twice younger. And that's really difficult. I can see that it is very bold and a big decision that Ryan Condal's House of the Dragon, starting up next month, is actually doing that. And this is the behind-the-scenes story of why all the hurdles they had to go through with that HBO, the old HBO at least, was very hesitant about the time skips, specifically because of the recastings. I'm not sure of the exact timeline on this, but we can sort of guess it out on a scale of months. In the lead up to Season 8, Brian Cogman made a big interview with Vanity Fair and Joanna Robinson, praising he's the third head of the dragon, he's going to go on to do great things, even though he admitted in it, I'm no longer working on a prequel pitch. And to his credit, he said in it, I was so busy working on Season 8 that I couldn't devote my full attention to it, and even by my own standards, I don't think it's as good as I could have made it if all of my attention was focused on it. So he admitted that, just it wasn't good because I was busy. What we can tell from the copyrights and his comments in that is he said in that interview with Vanity Fair that I got called down to a big dinner meeting with George R.R. Martin and Benioff and Weiss, or Martin formally handed off to me, you will be doing Dance of the Dragons. And this dinner was in May of 2017. The same month that they announced that Carly Ray was a writer on it. That they announced, May 2017, here's 4 writers, we know the 5th one was Chariot, and Carly Ray was out within a month or something? Because Cogman was brought in. We do know that Cogman's idea was copyrighted by that August, so that's 3 months later. I don't think he was directly replacing her at first. The way they phrase it, and this is their claim, who knows if it's true, they claim that he was brought in to help fix it as a different voice, whatever that means in corporate double talk, and that eventually he replaced her. And that could be true. It could have been a process where she was eventually made to be a co-writer and then displaced, whatever. But Carly Ray was out within 3 months, and it was Brian Cogman's thing. But by the end of 2018, the final copyright filing we have is December 2018, Untitled Dance of the Dragons prequel by Ryan Condal. See? So all of that got worked out 2018. Then through 2019, when Martin was saying there's 3 finalists left, he was referring to Jane Goldman's Long Night, Max Borenstein's Valyria, and now Ryan Condal's House of the Dragon. Now, I don't know if Cogman put time skips in that Carly Ray didn't want to, because we don't have a description of what his thing was. All we know is he said, by my own standards, it wasn't good because I was busy juggling Season 8. And I don't know how much of Ray's thing was in his or not, but it doesn't matter because Condal and Martin have repeatedly said Ryan Condal started over from scratch. Brian Cogman has said, nothing I did is in the new thing. They told me nothing is in it. They're restarting from scratch with a new attempt to adapt the same source material. So none of Carly Ray's stuff and none of Brian Cogman's stuff affected Condal, other than that he was doing time skips that Martin wanted to do that Ray, or possibly HBO at the time, was reluctant to do. And you can see how this juggled up the timeline here, that what it now seems to be is that, yeah, Carly Rae's original Dance of the Dragons pitch must have been Game of Thrones spin-off number 3, and they expunged it when she left, and then, or replaced it with Untitled Brian Cogman spin-off. And it's like they changed their minds midstream on the numbering scheme of these things, that, well, then Brian Cogman's should be the new spin-off number 3 as a code name. Instead, they counted that unofficially as number 5, because again, in the background was Far Chariot's bad Targaryen Conquest idea, that it was in limbo for so long that the Dance of the Dragons pitch had time to shift showrunners on it, you see? So the 6th one pitched was Chariot Targaryen Conquest and became number 6. It was really number 5, because number 3 got rebooted under Cogman, Dance of the Dragons. This explains all of the mysteries. I've been thinking on this for 2 years of why are the numbers different. It's because they shifted leads multiple times. And it never occurred to me that maybe Carly Rae was doing Dance of the Dragons first. They led us to believe that Brian Cogman was the hand-picked guy to do Dance of the Dragons. He was a replacement. And by his own admission, didn't do a good job because he was busy, and okay, maybe he wouldn't have asked for this if they hadn't assigned it to him. That's in the past. But this is the secret story of the War of the Five Pitches now fully revealed. We had 3 separate showrunners for Dance of the Dragons because HBO had to be dragged into the difficulty of time skips with recasting in Season 1. There was a Targaryen Conquest idea, but it was really bad. And turns out one of the other ones was Nymeria. So those 5 were prequels phase 1, or Marvel Cinematic Universe terms, that was wave 1, phase 1. Then, because they kind of ran HBO into the ground, they couldn't adapt to the streaming wars with Netflix and everything. HBO's parent company got bought out by AT&T. And they turned Time Warner into Warner Media. So you remember last year, when the first half of 2021, we got this new wave of prequel pitches. We had Nymeria, again, as it turns out, with Amanda Segel. And I said at the time, for all we know, one of these might have been what I was calling the 5th pitch. What does this tell you? They like Nymeria as a concept enough and want to see it made that they recycled the basic idea into a new pitch phase under a different writer. They didn't go, well, I guess we're never going to have Nymeria show. They want this made, and we're willing to recycle it under someone else. Similarly, Dance of the Dragons is such a big prequel era, they recycled it not once but twice under find a new writer rather than cancel the project. I don't know why Brian Helgeland left. They said nothing about his treatment. Maybe he's just busy. But they brought in Amanda Segel to do Nymeria now. Other stuff from prequel wave 2, they recycled back in Dunk and Egg under new writer Steve Conrad. Well, recycled. It was part of wave 0 that the first 2 that Martin himself pitched. They said these could be the best ones, Dance of the Dragons and Dunk and Egg. Now it's Steve Conrad. That's a whole joke Ryan Condal has, that he said, in some ways I'm both the last pitch and the first. Because back in 2016 I was asking Martin, hey, I've heard they're doing prequels, could I do Dunk and Egg? And he had to tell him they already passed on it, but he really wanted to do it. So that's the second one. And it's also an idea that was floating around. And then we have Bruno Heller doing the 9 voyages of young Corlys Velaryon the Sea Snake, which he's an explorer from Westeros that goes to other lands like E.T., so it's a great way to introduce the wider world to a TV-only audience. All 3 of these are live-action ideas, and all of them have advanced from the pitch phase to the we ordered a pilot script phase, as of right now. That doesn't necessarily mean that a pilot will be filmed, or in some cases maybe they just see the pilot script and go, okay, straight to series, but they are working on an actual formal script. That's the most recent news we've had. There's probably been other stuff going on behind the scenes. And I think everyone's just in standby mode, waiting to see how well House of the Dragon Season 1 does. That, mark my words, if and when it succeeds, because we've seen good stuff from it, there's going to be a lot of announcements come November. about other shows, other spin-offs. They're waiting. Those are the 3 current live-action prequel ideas Nymeria's recycled. They mentioned that they toyed with the idea of a Flea Bottom show, and I don't know what the structure of that would have been. I can see, oh, it's like a slice of life, maybe animated, set of short. No, they said it was live action. But they said it never went beyond the nascent phase. It was like a brainstorming idea. Does that mean it was part of the original brainstorming wave or a new idea they came up with? We can't know. On top of that, Martin himself has confirmed that there are 3 animated projects, one of which is about Yi-Ti, Fantasy China. It's called The Golden Empire. Based on that, I really strongly suspect that one of the other animated things is about the Summer Isles. And Westeros.org, Elio and Linda have themselves said this, that in their list of what you could have done as a prequel, but my God, it was 5 years ago, they made these big videos about, hey, they just said they're interested in doing spin-offs May 2017, so they made a big video of everything we as co-authors of the World Book think you could do. They said Yi-Ti and Summer Isles were potential ideas. And I think they're going to do those as animated things to, lay the groundwork for a later live-action thing or something. I can't think of what the third one would be. I think it would be like an outsized, I'm guessing, if I were them, it would be an outsized version of the histories and lore things that were really popular in Game of Thrones, but they were motion comics. They weren't even animation. They were good. The one new detail we got about the animated stuff was that Martin said in this Hollywood Reporter interview, he compared their animated styles to the animation quality to Netflix's acclaimed Love and Death Plus Robots. That this isn't a motion comic. This isn't, this is high budget, top of the line. It could compete with the best animation coming out of Netflix or Amazon when they say an animated project. The weird thing also in this article was, Hibbard says that there are, quote, there are also 3 animated projects, possibly 4, in the works. This is the first I'm hearing about this. I'm going to split this off into a shorter 2-minute video to give more focus to that. As a standalone video from this of, wait, there might be a 4th animated thing in the works, and they're all really high quality on the level of Love and Death and Robots. Doom of Valyria, like I said, that's on hold. You might see progress on that again. By progress, I mean pitching it again in 3 years when the Lakers show is over. But this is what is in Wave 2 now, in terms of the prequels. And then, of course, you have that they said, Kit Harington came to us with an idea for a Jon Snow sequel spin-off. And it's been in development almost as long as these other ones. Well, we first heard about Nymeria and Duncan Egg in their current form early 2021. So does that mean Kit has been developing a Jon Snow thing for a year and a half? He said he hired a team of writers already. They already have scripts and stuff. There's no guarantee that'll be made. I mean, it is Kit Harington himself pushing for it, but that's just, I don't know what to analyze about that. There's not much more I can say about it. All bets are off. But that was new, you understand. That wasn't in HBO's list of ideas. They said our list of ideas when we were brainstorming in late 2016 was about 15 things. Which leads into my final section. I said, saving for the end, I wanted to just list off, well, could you get 15 to 20 ideas? Yes, absolutely. Like, when Westeros.org made their list, if you actually write it down, it's over 15 things. That's not a problem. That, what can we confirm that they did? I'm just rattling this off. We know that the original, the 5 finalists were Long Night, Nymeria, Doom of Valyria, Targaryen Conquest, and Dance of the Dragons. Okay, that's 5 things. And they probably considered Duncan Egg, because if Dance of the Dragons was in that list of 15 things, they probably would have also put Duncan Egg in there. It just got passed over. Remember, they said any idea, no matter how ridiculous. So I think you'd keep Duncan Egg in if you kept in number 7 here, which is the 7 heroes. That thing I mentioned before, that they wanted to have, like, no, this is the legend that inspired the 7 gods. That isn't a thing, but it was one of the maybe 15-ish ideas they were batting around. They cited it as the worst idea. Then there's the question of, were the 9 voyages of young Corlys the Sea Snake part of the original list of 15 things? Now, Westeros.org did include that in their list. They said this is something you could do as a prequel, so if it stood out to them, it probably stood out to HBO as it could be an adventure show. Not necessarily on the list, it probably was. I'd also have to guess that in our fan lists, like Westeros.org, they listed off young Tywin and the Rain Rebellion as probably a good thing you could turn into a show. And even like 2 months ago, George R. R. Martin remarked, you know, the story of young Tywin and the Rain Rebellion, I could turn into either one large book or 3 small books if I had the time. He was acknowledging this exists as a narrative, and if it exists as a narrative, you could turn it into a TV show, whether it's book form or TV form, as opposed to the Andal invasions aren't a narrative. Like, you might do that as an anthology or something, and I think they should do that as like a supersized version of the Histories and Lore, as an animated anthology. That might indeed be what they're doing as one of those 3 animated projects, as a bigger version of Histories and Lore. That gets me up to maybe 9 things. Another issue is, some of these, you wonder, is it going to be a long prequel show or a couple of short ones? Like, does Targaryen Conquest include the Sons of the Dragon Faith Militant Uprising era? They might have counted that as 2 things. Does Dance of the Dragons include the Regency era? Now, in this specific case, I think them in 2016, they wouldn't have known about the Regency era because that wasn't in print until Fire and Blood came out. We knew of it only vaguely from the World of Ice and Fire. So they probably didn't count the Regency as something else. Like Westeros.org's list didn't count it as separate. They said that'll either be like season 7 of a dance show, or they might split it off into a new show. So the Conquest and the Dance, each of them might, this might be 2 things or 4 things, depending on how you count them. Biggest example of this is the first Blackfire Rebellion. If I were doing it as a TV show, I would make it a big 7-season thing, starting with young Aegon IV the Unworthy, starting when his uncle is the hand of the king and real power behind the throne, Viserys II, deal with the conquest of Dorne in Season 1, deal with Baelor in Season 2, then have the corrupt reign of Aegon IV. And then it would be sort of like Kate's Lives of 4 Kings, the TV show, that you'd start with the young dragon Daeron, then you'd go to Baelor, then you'd go to Aegon the Unworthy. And Martin has said, I've always kind of wanted to make a Blackadder-style book about Aegon IV. Then have the first Blackfire Rebellion as like the 7th season. Because if you make it into a TV show, it's a 1-year war. It wouldn't be that long. I'd rather have you build up the story of Daemon and Daeron's father, then their childhoods at his court, shaping them into men they are. Like what they're doing with House of the Dragon. You don't start with Rhaenyra as an adult. You start with her as a teenager and show how she turned into that person. So the question is, do they count that as 1 big show on their list of 15 things, or 3 smaller shows that, well, we'd have the reign of Viserys II, the Shadow Hand, then the reign of Aegon the Unworthy, and then the first Blackfire Rebellion? Is that 3 shows, or is it 1 show? Hard to say. Either way, we get up to over 15 things, and then, like, was the Flea Bottom idea in that list of 15 things? Then Yeeti, they've said Yeeti will be an animated idea, presumably also Summer Isle, so you add another 2 there. So just looking at the list, you could split it up a little more with a few more specific things, but the things that jump out at you, yeah, it's not hard to see how they got a list of about 15-ish things when they were doing that there weren't like 5 other crazy ideas we've never heard of. These are generally the top 15, 16-ish ideas you could be doing. Who's to say if they'll ever revisit any of them, though? Like, these are ideas they passed on. I would love to see young Tywin in the Rain Rebellion, but I don't think that's a current project. Maybe they do it as an animated thing, again, the anthology idea, but right now, Wave 2 consists of 4 live-action potential things. Nymeria, Dunk and Egg, The Sea Snake, Jon Snow Sequel spin-off, and 3, possibly 4 animated projects. Sorry for the length of this. I re-recorded this twice trying to make it shorter, but this is summarizing every development in this franchise on the scale of the past 6 years. And it is a useful guide to what ideas are floating out there for the next 3 to 5 years. These are things they consider to be good ideas that they're looking at. Obviously, Dunk and Egg, Nymeria got recycled. They like it so much. Young Corlys would be a good tie-in to House of the Dragon while also introducing Yi Ti for the cartoon. Valyria is not going to be the next phase. That I like what Ryan Condal said when he likened it to Marvel phases. He said, you know, Phase 1 is Thor 1, Captain America 1, and Iron Man 2. The Iron Man 1 was like Phase 0 of the MCU. So he said, we are not, no one is the Kevin Feige of this, no one is in charge of that. We are in the earliest Iron Man 1 phases, maybe Thor 1 phases of actually talking about this. Because you remember then Iron Man 2 came out and like Thor's hammer was in the stinger in the post-credit scene, and like they show Captain America's shield at one point, and they were seeding other spin-offs. So if House of the Dragon is the Iron Man of the World of Westeros cinematic universe, it's the first of a shared prequel spin-off thing, Phase 2 is going to be Nymeria and Young Corlys, and we're not even going to get to Valyria and stuff until Phase 3. We're not going to get to Targaryen Conquest until maybe Phase 3. Then you're talking Phase 4, we're looking at the Blackfires and the other stuff. But you have to plan out the phases. We must stick to the template of the phases. That is how this type of thing works when you make a cinematic universe. I'm sorry, I'm just having fun with the phases. So that's where things stand now, the road it took to get here and where we're going. And all I can really say is we cannot predict what is going to happen until House of the Dragon Season 1 does well. I think it will do well. I've been following it closely for 2 years. It's a great source material, and I think they've done a good job with it. That if anything could recapture even a fraction of the success of the original show, just be a successful show on the scale of The Witcher or something, Dance of the Dragons will be a good show that could inspire other spin-offs. The problem is, has the audience soured on this so much as a franchise that they won't come back? I'm afraid of that all the time. Because, like, book fans who read this and, oh, it's a different show, and are willing to give it a shot. I've been looking at, like, mainstream reviews of the trailer a lot by mainstream media channels. They are not reporting on this. They still think they didn't look at anything after Season 8. They expect this to fail. They're asking if Benioff or Weiss are still involved when blatantly you could Google that. They're not. They rage quit to such an extent that they won't even Google who's in charge of the spin-off to see if it's the people they hate or not. So HBO itself doesn't know what's going to happen. That's why they've held off on announcements until after Season 2 airs. They're not even entirely sure how many seasons House of the Dragon will have, because the show needs to be a success before you start giving it more seasons. I'm going to make a separate video about that. It came up in the same interview. How many seasons is this projected to run? How many years? Because there might be 2-year gaps between seasons because it takes so long to make, as we've seen. A lot of questions here about where we've gone and where the long road we've had since Game of Thrones was already in let's wrap it up mode since right after Season 6 finale. They were looking to move on. It took everyone by surprise. The one nice thing I'll say about this is by the end of the article it points out George R. R. Martin has a lot more clout at the new HBO than he did at the old HBO. And they try to talk around this. You see, I'm screenshotting it up here, but they said, we finally came around, the new people, maybe we should listen to the guy who actually invented this world and these stories about what would be a good prequel, because we picked The Long Night and it was a disaster. He told us, don't do it, it'll be a disaster. We did it anyway. That just, from what they're telling us, you never know if they're 100% honest, it seems like George R. R. Martin has a lot more clout there, that he signed that 5-year development deal. And that's good news for us if it turns out to be true, but just it seems like they're really listening to him a lot more than they used to in this long 6-year process of, let's toss around some, hey, let's subvert expectations with Targaryen Conquest, making a crazy pitch. That's shot a good idea. When the living author is telling you that the way to tell Dance of the Dragons is with time skips between actors, and that's why it was one of the first pitches made. It was one of the first 2 he made, and it was the last one to be greenlit. because they were dragging their feet on, even when the author is telling you just recast with younger ones, they wouldn't do it. Now they're basically listening to him. And imagine how much his clout will succeed now that they're doing Dance of the Dragons on his terms that he was insisting on for 6 years. Do it with time skips. If that decision succeeds and House of the Dragon Season 1 is a mega hit, think of how much even more clout Martin will gain behind the scenes at HBO to just do what Martin tells us. He was right. We can't tell. It's just the world will change in the aftermath of Season 1 in a way even I can't predict anymore. HBO can't predict it. This will be a watershed moment. So stick around for news and analysis on this. That we live in uncertain times.